Do you like planes? It's going to make sense in a second, trust me. You see, in the world of Pierre II, Allied planes commonly return to base with additional air vents installed. Allied big heads took all the data from where on returning planes were these vents and sought to put thicker steel on affected parts to prevent any counterfeit air cooling from appearing in their designs. How does that have anything to do with the topic? Patience, my dear, we're almost there. Allies were ready to glue iron to their flycrafts, but one smart fellow named Abraham Wald pointed out that the planes from which said data comes are those who returned to base. Planes hit in remaining areas simply didn't make it, so they weren't in the data. Most common phenomena glued to the side of this story is survivorship bias. But I want you to pay attention to something else what Abraham did. He took existing data, conceived in his mind inexistent data, and extrapolated correct intel from it. And his name specifically is mentioned here because a group of the best scientists in the world had an issue with extrapolating from incomplete data. And if really good scientists, whose literal job it is to think well, couldn't correctly extrapolate from incomplete data, why is it assumed that average Guild Wars 2 player can? You see, the fundamental issue with player feedback is that players are in charge of gaining the additional data they need to draw correct conclusions from data presented in the patch notes. No one in the world has the time to play all 9 classes to the point where they could just read the notes and instantly come to the correct assumptions, and most players in Guild Wars 2 are spending most of their time playing one class, sometimes even one spec, in one of 3 game modes. Most player feedback is given by people with incomplete knowledge about 8 out of 9 classes and sometimes even about the one they main, and on top of it, conceived purely from assumptions. And to show how flawed this can be, let's assume that Quantum Strike gets its initial damage reduced to 1 plus 0.1 power ratio in versus modes. You'll know it is an Elementalist skill, because patch notes will kindly tell you. But what weapon is that skill on? What attunement? What is the purpose this skill fulfills in builds? Maybe it's a mobility option, or defense skill, or maybe a CC skill. You wouldn't know none of these things if you weren't playing Elementalist, or researching Guild Wars 2 skills in your free time, or you just weren't told by someone. Quantum Strike is a third air sword skill, and is a damaging skill with short range, no control effects. So that damage reduction must be an abysmally unfair cataclysmic nerf. Well, it isn't, because all the damage Quantum Strike does is already packed into 9 lightning strikes that hit over the short duration after you hit the initial hit. The initial hit could not deal damage at all, and the skill would still be good, because quite frankly it already doesn't do damage. Now, consider the number of times you were wrong about the importance of this change, and how with each new information this perceived importance itself changed. With how patch notes are presented in their current form, you only get the name of the skill, the class it belongs to, and what changes, leaving out all unchanged properties of said skill, and what other skills are on the weapon this skill belongs to, which are both important context clues to determine how will aforementioned change affect the user experience. And this scenario repeats for each class in some way, shape or form, effectively making a player only capable of giving genuine feedback about the class he mains. Further than this, there are changes that have ambiguous impact to begin with. For example, reducing the amount of rage skills Berserker needs to upkeep rage. It will potentially increase his DPS because in place of unnecessary rage skills, signets can be equipped. And some of these signets increase base attributes of power, precision and ferocity. This is being offset by the fact that some of the rage skills also do damage, so depending on which of these you part ways with, your skill bar will look different and your damage output will also look different. And it has different connotations for power and condi builds, and also will impact PvP and World v World as well, where outcome of the changes also isn't that easy to fully comprehend because of all the variables we'd have to consider in the equation. Are we playing skirmisher or duelist build? Are we roaming solo or playing in Zerg? Are we power or condi? Do we have mobility to stick to targets? Do we have stability or resistance? How will this change behave in interaction with heightened focus change? Do we generate enough adrenaline to capitalize on any of this? Will we be in a fight long enough for any of this to matter? And are we good at the game enough for any of that to matter? All of this is before we get to the complicated questions. At this point, you probably either consider me clinically insane or have been convinced that on average, giving credible feedback to most changes is impossible for most people. Both assumptions are correct. You remember when we gave credible feedback to EOD elite specs and helped alleviate the inconceivable disaster they were? Sure, they still ended up a disaster, but not as much as they would have without tweaks between beta and release. To which must be added that balance changes are less of a difference that would be easier to properly judge and tweak beforehand than completely new subclasses. What I'm pointing at here is that, in relation to quarterly balance patches, beta weekends could be more than just PR stunt. If we had beta weekend for the June patch, we would have known that Scourge will be okay and no one would have to worry. As well as we would have known that Signet Catalyst is going to become a problem and hotfix that crap before it even hit live. Further than this, things like damage changes for PvE specs could be labbed out and we would have known if spec needs compensation buffs or nerf to its DPS to stay relevant in strikes, raids, and so on and so forth. I am wholeheartedly convinced that the beta weekends for quarterly balance patches would improve quality of player feedback tremendously, as we would have concrete evidence to build our feedback on, not just assumptions. And everyone could have checked if something is going to end up broken or not, and what needs to be fixed before it hits live. All the changes could be tested by the community in all game modes and all scenarios they matter in. The same reasoning behind why we get betas for specs, for new weapons and new combat features apply to quarterly balance patches tenfold more than to completely new features. And because devs shown off new features on stream, we know working build of the new patch already exists before patch preview. Now only set up a beta and give every beta character a notebook with balance changelog in form of a gizmo similar to most book items in the game. Maybe it is too late for the most recent patch, but every next in a row could have a beta weekend and game would benefit from it, as we could not only have fun previewing the patches, but would also make devs' job easier, as more crap would be caught before it reaches the goulash and they'd have to hotfix the game far less often. As far as I'm concerned, a win for everyone involved. Of course, I don't know how much effort and resources setting up a beta weekend requires, and therefore I'll just throw that idea out there and move on to whatever's next. Hopefully, someone more important than me finds this video and shines a light onto that idea in a business meeting of fabulous, generous, wonderful, very smart and attractive people in charge. In the meantime, I'd be thrilled to know whether or not I'm going insane, so whoever may concern, feel free to tell me whether or not I am. Crabface out.